you recognize the power of being confident in who you are and what you do, knowing who you are and what you do, and then allowing the business to come to you based on the great work you've done in the past. I had to decide to only take on clients who I felt I could be successful with. And if you do that, right, and if you do that, Derek, you minimize the chances that you're going to have a client that's going to drive you out of the business. First half of my career, I chased because I had a lot of the same sales ambition, sales DNA that made me a top performer. It wasn't a healthy combination in running a business. The worst thing I ever did was try to be all things to all people. The best thing you can do is just wow your clients, impress your clients, and then leverage time as you do that to really build equity in your brand and allow that to sustain the business over time.
In this episode, I sit down with James Rores, the founder and CEO of Floriss Group, and I'm proud to say this is my second time sitting down with James and picking his brain on all things sales consulting. You see, James is likely one of the most experienced sales consultants in the world, and in this episode, James reflects on his 18-year track record. We even delve into things like the intersection of tattoos and business, which leads to a great conversation about authenticity. We get into James's insights on the evolving preferences of B2B buyers and whether traditional sales frameworks like BANT are still effective. James also shares strategies for client acquisition, content creation, and pricing structures, offering valuable advice to fellow consultants. James Rores, our guest today, was our #2 most downloaded episode last season. And the title of that episode was Lessons from 17 Years of Sales Consulting and Advising 7,500 Clients. So James, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. And, I just recounted to somebody, it's been 18 years since I've been doing this, and it blew my mind. So it's just amazing to me how time flies.
Time flies, yeah. And that's impressive. I mean, I think anyone who's been doing any kind of consulting can attest to that longevity is inspiring and also just baffling at the same time, because some of us, I was having a conversation with another future guest who is a consultant, but has gone back into traditional workforce. And we were talking about the lane switching that consultants do typically. And I wouldn't call it back going back, because we both agreed that it's not a step backwards often when you go to work for someone as opposed to working for yourself as a consultant. But 17 years doing that, and the scope of service that you've provided, how do you summarize how you've lasted so long in the game?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm sure I felt every tug and every stress that anyone has experienced doing that, right? And we joke about how being an entrepreneur requires a little bit of insanity as well as kind of resiliency and ambition.
Right.
And there have been several times when I've thought about the idea of becoming an employee again, and those tend to be fleeting thoughts because at times you can miss the camaraderie of a team.
Absolutely.
You can miss being part of a consistent effort, a singular consistent effort. The and so those tugs have all been there, and the way I've lasted through it is simply by recognizing the mission that I have is to is really to spread the word and to impact as many organizations as I can. We started with a very clear mission. The business has changed a lot. Our mission has never changed. We have this statement on our website, strong companies, brave kids. When we started,
I love that.
goal, well, thank you. The realization was that strong companies build strong communities, and strong communities build strong families, and strong families create brave kids. And, that's the value chain that we're invested in. And that's the value chain that we think about when we pick the partners we work with, the clients we work with, et cetera.
And I imagine along the way, you've had opportunities presented to you that were lucrative and tempting. Talk to me about the thought process. And I imagine the mission is in there, but bring it down a node. you have an offer in front of you that could be worth it. I'm sure you've said no. So talk about burning the boats.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with trying consulting or coaching or training and
Right.
realizing it's not for you. I mean, that's just part of the process. For me, the idea of being a full-time employee means, and on one hand, it means a level of security and level of opportunity. And on the other hand, it means you're giving up some control. And
Right.
over time, it's not that I need control. It's this idea of having control over where I invest my time,
Mhm.
where I invest my interests, what I allow myself to be caught up in, and so yeah, there when I look at the spreadsheet, I definitely see millions and millions of dollars unrealized based on the decisions I've made. On the other hand, I've also had opportunities to invest in companies along
Hmm.
the way based on these relationships that have
Right.
also been fruitful. There are trade-offs. At the end of the day, for me, money didn't keep me in my last sales gig before I started the company, and money is not going to be the primary driver for those decisions I make. And it's been, you know, what ends up happening as we get older. And I don't want to sound like this old guru on a mountain or an old dude,
I'm sure
but
your
what
kids remind you how old you are all the time.
yeah, my kids are brutal, no doubt. But as you gain some experience, you also gain some perspective, and um, you know what ends up happening is as you get older, it gets easier. It's you recognize the power of being confident in who you are and what you do, knowing who you are and what you do, and then allowing the business to come to you based on the great work you've done in the past. One of the things that we did, or I did when I started, was um, strive for that 100% uh, satisfaction guarantee with every one of my clients. And I decided to guarantee that on every session just to make sure that there was no chance for miscommunication or stepping outside of the lines. And that helped create a level of accountability to me. I had to decide to only take on clients who I felt I could be successful with. And if
That's
you do
huge.
that,
Yeah.
right, and if you do that, Derek, you minimize the chances that you're going to have a client that's going to drive you out of the business. Like that
I'm
horrible
never
client.
consulting again.
I'm never consulting again, and I'm just going to go work for somebody. So,
Right.
so when you think of quality and you think about having the ability to choose and having the discipline to choose, not chasing. And it's very hard for me to learn this lesson. The first half
Yeah.
of my career, I chased because I had a lot of the same sales um, ambition, sales DNA that made me a top performer. It wasn't a healthy combination in running a business. So lesson learned, but if you can do that, you can make your life easier. You can build that rapid success, and you can build a level of comfort that makes getting up every day to do it really exciting.
Right. Do what you love, sort of thing. And I love the point about time and not being driven by money. That for me is truly the impetus of this. When I look back at my time as a frontline manager, you're working crazy hours to make sure your team is successful. When I was an individual rep, I was working crazy hours to make sure I was successful. And all the time I'm raising a family. And one day you wake up and your kids are graduating high school and you're like, where did all the time go? And you start realizing that there's so much time left on the clock. How can I change this dynamic so that I wouldn't say do less and make more, but uh, take control of my time and my career as well, because you are susceptible to layoffs and other things that happen in business, the economy, you name it. And so having that control was definitely important, but for me, it was just really the time, to know that um, I have a granddaughter now, you know this. If I could go to her recital on a Thursday morning at 9 a.m. It's really hard when you're a dedicated manager or full-time individual contributor to make some of those trade-offs, right? You say, I'm all in, I have to be a company guy, carry the flag, can't not show up. And look, I get a lot of corporate environments are shifting and they're a lot more empathetic and so on and so forth. But to say that I can control my time, I control my schedule, to me is more powerful than most things. And I don't want to be the guy who's working 80 hours a week just to make $1 million a year. While I've never made $1 million a year, quite frankly, so I don't really know if it'd be worth it. But I definitely driven by time, and wholeheartedly. That's the big one for me. I appreciate that. Now, switching a little bit, but still on the thread of getting to know you, I noticed in an interview that I watched from 2 years ago that you were in, bringing the band back together, that
Oh yeah.
your
Oh yeah.
sleeves were only to your elbows. So, ladies and
Right.
gentlemen, we're talking about tattoos all of a sudden. So we're getting to
Uh,
know James Rores a little bit. Now they're down to your
all the way
wrists. So
down.
you're still,
Yeah.
yeah, all the way down. So the last 2 years you've done more work. I'm inked up myself, as you can see, and got a lot of other more work going on. But I'm just curious, like, what is your thoughts on tattoos in business? It's 2024. You're a consultant. There's a certain image that we want to portray and keep. Talk to me about how that just your thought process
Yeah.
around tattoos and business and what you're
Well,
doing.
I'll tell you what. I mean, if to know me is to recognize that I don't do a lot of things thoughtfully. I'm a very emotional dude. So
You said in your last episode you're not very much of a planner.
you're good, man. So you're gonna keep me honest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that podcast, by the way, was with Brad Zirconi, who is the former lead singer of The Toll, which was a band that signed by Geffen Records in the late 80s, early 90s. And he's just a killer dude. I don't think
Yeah,
he
he
has
seems
any
like a good
tats
dude.
on
Yeah.
him.
No,
He's
I mean he's all covered up. So in this I
yeah,
don't see any tats. But
he's a songwriter and a
yeah.
musician and a branding genius. And yeah, so today I think there's a couple things. One is uh, when we enter organizations, guys like you and I, people like
Yep.
you and I, we are agents of change,
Hmm.
and we're there to think a little different, and we're oftentimes not permanent. Um, Although I've had clients for 11 or 12 years, we're not permanent fixtures in the organization. So in the context of the role, it's we can somebody with tats in an organization that doesn't have any tats. Sometimes nobody cares, and most of the time, young folks, they don't care. Older folks, um, I've never had anybody kind of. I mean, I I had one client who wouldn't hire a dude because he wore brown shoes with a blue suit. So there's nothing you can do
What?
to help a
That
guy like
works
that.
as long as the
Yeah,
brown. I guess the
this
belts are out these days. But
yeah,
anyways,
there's nothing you can do to help a dude like that. So for
yeah.
me, it's like I'm not trying to appeal to that person. I
Hmm.
think that for me, at the end of the day, this was not a planned, it's not a thoughtful thing. But at the end of the day, people want to hire authenticity. And
Love
hell,
that.
man, if you can be authentic, you will find your niche.
Mm.
The worst thing I ever did was try to be all things to all people. And I did that in the early part of my
Great advice.
sales career, right? So, now you gotta suffer the consequences. But you know what? If you accept the fact that you will find your tribe, that you'll find your people, do it. Because
Mhm.
life is short. You go around once, and I'll tell you, when you get on the second half of your life, and you really begin to recognize and count the years you have left, it's much more important to be authentic
And
and
working with the
find,
people that
find
you
your
want
tribe.
to work with, right? Like you were
Yeah,
talking about the importance of
exactly,
selecting clients and so forth.
exactly.
It goes like, if I'm not for everyone. That's just the reality. And I've myself struggled with the image of being a consultant through this whole career of mine. I think in a lot of minds, you think of blue blazer, white shirt, MBA, crew cut, young to middle-aged white guy, and I'm none of those things, right? And so, but to those that aren't those things either, that maybe are rocking the tattoos in a respectable way. I'm not talking about face tats and crazy, going too crazy here. But hey, maybe you do it with taste as well. That can still work. So no judgment. But for those that don't fit that typical stereotype, there's still a lane for you. There's still a lot of value that we can bring into the market. There's still, you have a lot of, wisdom and skills and experience. And so if you're thinking of making that change as a consultant, I think that's one of the things I wanted to touch on was, and I love your point about authenticity, because that's kind of what I'm saying myself in rocking my tats as well. Is like, I'm not going to be for everybody. I'm going to be who I'm going to be in a professional way. And it doesn't determine me as an individual just because I can rock some ink. So
Yeah.
thanks for being open
Right.
about that. And so I think
Yeah.
we probably listen to different music in terms of bands and stuff, but I think we definitely share a passion for the needle. Now let's get to B2B sales here real quick and get down to some brass tacks. Gartner released a recent B2B buyers research study. And in there, the first thing they highlight is that 75% of buyers prefer, 75% of B2B buyers prefer a repless experience. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Um, well, let's think about that. And this is, and I don't know the research. I don't know the stats, where the stats came from, but my initial reaction is that first off, who are the B2B buyers that they interviewed, right? When we look at a sales model or a sales effort, we really only consider the decision maker and economic improver as buyers. We think of the needs and solutions buyers, the users and adopters and technical evaluators as influencers.
Hmm.
They're not really buyers because they don't make a decision. They can't control a decision. So would 75% of non-decision makers prefer not to talk to somebody? Sure. These are doers in lower to middle level situations that don't have decision control. And they've been given a task. They may not even know why they were given the task. I need to evaluate tech or whatever and then roll. So again, not knowing who they interviewed, my first reaction is, of course, those kinds of folks who aren't invested in the meaningful P&L impact or a meaningful business impact of that decision probably are thinking about themselves and just wanting to get shit done. Right. And maybe the
Mhm.
other 25% are like, hey, I own the P&L. I own the future of this business. My compensation is directly tied to the performance of the business. There's no way in hell, right? I'm going to just make a decision based on stuff I read on the internet. I've got to have live people and I've got to understand if I can trust them. I understand if they can educate me. I have to meet these people and find that differentiated human being with a unique product service package that addresses my unusual circumstances, or gives me the competitive advantage that I need. You cannot, most of the time, make those types of decisions without engaging human beings.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The premise of the research that they published was that B2C is influencing B2B,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that that tone is predominantly driven by repless experience, right? As consumers, we get on Amazon and we buy all kinds of things. We're buying cars online, Tesla, et cetera, and having them delivered to our homes. And so what they're saying was that getting technology to supplement that experience in the B2B world. And so
Yeah.
another stat that they shared was that I think it was like 43% of these buyers, there was like 3,500 buyers that they talked to. I don't know who, what industries and titles, whatnot, but they were saying about 43% of them would buy from a joint experience. So it's, technology
Yeah.
enabling,
Yeah.
so I just figured that I thought that was really important considering what we do. We help enable individual contributors, right? You and your
Yeah.
practice will, help put together an operating model, get that instituted in the business, which makes sense for that company, and then help train and enable and hire and recruit salespeople to fill those positions. And
Right.
so if
Right.
if buyers are saying more and more they don't want to deal with reps, what does that mean for our business, right? I think that's where I was kind of
Well,
going with that. Yeah.
yeah, no, I love it. And I'll tell you what it means for our business. It's the kind of selling. So our model works in B2B, B2C environments. But, what I think you're saying, again, going deeper, when you think about cars and other things that we are used to buying, that we buy over and over and over again, where we have some innate knowledge and we have some competency, I would argue that we're less likely to seek the expertise that we need when we are in a business or in a, you know, as consumers buying something that's either pricey or will impact our life significantly. For example, B2C sale, a clinic, for example, that deals with or that supplies plastic surgery, right? You're looking at maybe still a five-figure,
Yep.
$10,000,
Yep.
$20,000 investment, but it's going to change your life immensely. You're
Right.
not going to buy that over the internet. You're also
They're going to be cutting
not
me open. Damn right.
right, and it's going to be something that's going to create some challenge of life.
Yeah.
So what you're doing here is you've got to find a product service package, a service that fits you, but you've also got to build trust in the human being that you're engaging, who's going to walk you through that process. So when we talk about sales, we're talking about, we define sales as the exchange of value. And in order to exchange value, we have to bring value beyond the product service package that you're selling. So I believe, to answer your question, people will always be required in those transactions or those exchanges where the value that I bring to the table is required as a human being, as a salesperson,
Right.
and where that value that I bring can differentiate me and my company apart from the competition.
Exactly.
So if I'm selling cars, right, the cars are the same. There may be a little bit difference between dealerships and how they service those cars, but what's really going to differentiate the experience for that buyer is the salesperson. So we've worked in the auto industry, we've worked in consumer electronics, right? Any kind of larger purchase where that's commoditized, where the salesperson can be the individual that adds or is responsible for up to 80% of the differentiation of that product service package, can really make a difference. We're going to have jobs for a long time, but you've got to bring value.
I love that. And what I hear in that is when you say you got to bring value, is there's a value surplus that the buyer has to be able to perceive in this transaction. And on that, part of that value creation is through the experience of working with a knowledgeable, skilled representative who can help guide me through this process. We already know, and it's no new thing, that we're no longer the toll gates to information. That changed a long time ago, but now people still need guides in that process, particularly if it's more complex and more expensive of a product that they might be buying. But yeah, product-led organizations are doing really well with repless or small teams. So we know that there is a place for that. It all is, I think, to your point, and wanting to know more about who was researched, it's all contingent a little bit on the industry, the complexity, the sales process, and so forth. So thank you for your thoughts on that. I appreciate it. Switching gears, is BANT broken?
I love this. I love this question. I've been studying BANT. I've been studying AIDA, right? So
Right.
AIDA, AIDA, which we remember from Glenn Ross. I mean, that was developed in late 1800s by an advertising executive, not a salesperson.
Good knowledge. Okay.
Yeah, so you're familiar. BANT was developed by IBM, and it became public or popular in the 50s. And think about IBM, what they were selling and why it was useful for them, and think about the time as well. Tech was new. Whatever they were selling was new. So budget, authority, need, time frame, that might have been all they required. Competition was lower. All kinds of things were happening.
Buyer
Now,
committees were different. You didn't have
yeah,
15 people involved in the buying process from 3 different business units. Yeah.
it's very possible. And by the way, if you go to the IBM website, you'll still see BANT there.
Wow.
It's
I
trained
gotta check that out.
by IBM today.
Okay.
And there's great history of it as well. So the thing that folks have to think about when they think about sales processes, the first thing you have to think about is, does your process differentiate you? So I don't care what you use, but does it serve to differentiate you in the eyes and the experience of the buyers or the buying center that you're serving? That's the first requirement.
Right.
So even if you went beyond BANT to MEDIC or MEDPIC, right? I mean, look at the evolution of Medic. I mean, it was Medic at one point, then it became MedPick. Why? Because they forgot stuff. So they added like Champion at the end of it. Like it's the silliest thing. You know, a large organization like Salesforce.com had success with it, but guess what? They did a lot more around Medic than just using Medic to make it successful, right? They have a world-class, never before seen sales organization that just dominates. They get it. You try to make Medic work in your organization, just follow the standards, you're gonna underperform, right? Sales is not about simply adopting a process and going. You've got to make sure that it differentiates you in your marketplace and really impacts the buyer experience in the way that you want. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't do you any good to become one of three that the buyer is considering only to lose, right? You've got to go all the way. You've got to actually avoid the bake-off and become the sole sourced solution. So processes like BANT and others usually serve to just form a base or minimum impact for an organization. If you look at the top performers in any of these companies that leverage these processes, none of them follow the prescribed process. Most of them, right, will operate even outside of the prescribed CRM. Why is that?
Yeah.
Right? Because the process
Doesn't work for them.
It creates mediocre performers. And the top performers operate outside of it because they know there are other things that are more predictive of success that they've discovered. The key, which is what we do, is to understand what makes those top performers tick. Take those, deploy them through a process framework that everyone can adopt and adapt. That's what is going to get you success.
I love that. And I will not lie, for the longest time I was holding on to BANT.
It's easy, man. It's like,
well, to me, I felt like people were splitting
it's
hairs.
comfortable.
They feel like there was this semantics that we would get into to try and justify our own approaches, right? We want to coin our own terms. And I think there's also an aversion to using anything that is legacy, right? You mentioned it coming from the 1950s, and so, and that was spot on answer. I think there's an aversion to that in this era of selling, and probably every era that we've probably always said, well, we're going to do it different, but you're really not doing it all that different. That was kind of my mindset for a while. And as of late, I've read a couple other books, and I've listened to some of the interviews you've given, and it got me thinking about how BANT could be broken. And the thing that really triggered me getting ready for this interview was a discussion you had. I don't remember the interview, but you mentioned your win framework, and you were talking about impact, the I in win.
Yeah.
And you were saying that you said 80% of B2B buying decisions aren't budgeted.
Right.
Right. That right there to me is why BANT is broken, at least the B, right? Because the idea of asking is this budgeted? Is this something that's earmarked in the budget? Especially if you're selling it to the enterprise, it's not as effective. Yeah, they're going to steal budget. They're going to borrow budget. There's going to be, they'll get the budget. I mean, it goes to champion and different things in Medic as well, right? Like that's how you kind of champion across business units and budgets. But that's kind of what got me thinking about BANT being broken, and why your win model might be, or wins model, I should say, might be relevant.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think if you just look at historically what has happened since the Depression, the recession in the early 08, 09, 2010, when you look at what happened after that, right? The budget authority was pushed way up the organization. So, the people you're talking to have no idea if there's budget, right? You could talk to the CEO, and they're not going to be able to tell you, yes, there's budget, because what happens today is that there's a pool of money that is generally available, and the highest priority gets it, period.
Simply
right?
said. I mean, it kind of works the same in real life. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's a fool's errand, one,
Mm,
to think about it from a sales perspective, to prioritize that from a sales perspective. It's a fool's errand to try to create a champion, turn your buyer into a champion by having them think about budget, because it's irrelevant for them as well. What you both have to be thinking about is, what kind of impact can I have on the organization? One, and how does that impact compare to the other options, the other priorities the organization has at the moment, right? And then the only way you actually know is by talking to people who are in the know. You have to have what we refer to as an above the power line conversation. You've got to work with that champion to get above the power line and continue these conversations with the folks that have that insight, that knowledge. But they're not going to want to talk to a rep who's obsessed with budget, who's going to ask them, "Hey, do you have the authority?" Who's going to ask them all kinds of superficial or transactional questions.
transactional questions. Exactly. Yep.
They're going to want to talk to a rep who understands their business,
Right.
who understands the decision criteria that is used to determine priority, and actually becomes a business partner in the context of the decision that has to be made. And I don't care, again, if you're selling cars, plastic surgery, or enterprise software, you're still selling to a human being, and the same decision process plays. What I would say also, big realization for me early in my career was that buyers really don't know how to buy.
Mm.
They don't know what's in their best interest. How's that possible?
That's actually pretty profound because there's a
Right.
lot of emphasis put on buyer's journey and how they buy and that focus. So to, and I think you're right. A lot of times if they're buying tech they've never bought before, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And what we have to do is, we talk about trust, and a lot of folks have the wrong idea about trust. And I've been studying this for years and applying different definitions to what we do. And, one of the best definitions I've heard is this idea that, somebody trusts you when they feel safe or when they're around you, right? My daughter had a friend who had a unusual friend, and when I asked her, "Hey, what do you hang out with this she was 12, and one of her best friends was like this 8-year-old kid boy lived around the corner." I said, "Why do you hang out with John? Like, it just seems so odd." And she's like, "He gets me."
Oh.
Right. And I thought that was just so profound. She's a very intellectual, very smart young lady, now in college, but he gets me. So what do we want, to achieve as salespeople? We want that. Well, you have to earn that, right? So you've got to show up um, with their best interest in mind. No one's going to trust you or feel safe around you unless they feel like you've got their best interest at heart.
If you're just
How do you
checking
do that?
boxes, they're going to check out. Hmm.
Yeah, man. How do you do that? You've got to be authentic. You've got to be sincere. There are actually 4 ways to do that real quick. You've
Yes.
got to practice. You've got to be authentic first, right? You've got to practice and be vulnerable, right? You've got to be transparent, practice transparency, and you have to be accountable, right? Because if I'm never going to trust you if you don't do what you say you're going to do, and I'm not going to trust you if you don't hold me, the buyer, accountable to what I said I was going to do, right? Because in that moment, now I'm demonstrating the fact that not only do I not trust you, I don't respect you. So it's about
Mm.
authenticity, vulnerability, transparency, and accountability. If you can achieve those, you can deliver the trust, the experience that will earn you that trust. And you'll be on your way to practicing sales as a servant leader.
Beautiful. And vulnerability. Wow. If that's not one of the things that you might think is the total opposite in a lot of respects, right? I'm wrong. I don't know. I'll have to figure it out. I screwed up. Uh, Being able to be vulnerable about your shortcomings or your failures and these sorts of things is almost like unheard of in that ego-driven salesperson, right? You talked a lot about that ego-driven salesperson and how you kind of embodied that early in your career for the first 15 years in our last episode. And when you think about that out in a, excuse me, in a leadership concept, I feel like that's even more paramount as well as being vulnerable as a leader. That's how you develop trust as well with your people. But
Hmm.
to the sales consultant that's listening in who feels like they need to have all the answers and always be right because they're the consultant, right?
Right.
Vulnerability still plays true there as well, right? I always remind my clients that one of the best things of what I do is not just the pattern recognition that I have, but it's acquiring this pattern recognition of going from client to client and helping fix these issues. But I learn all the way, and I learn far more. It goes back to our original topic around working full time for one organization versus consulting. In a consulting track, I'm going to learn far more, far faster than I would, I think, than if I was in a static or relatively static environment. And but to convey that to a client in a professional manner that, hey, I have some answers, I don't have all the answers, and being
Hmm.
vulnerable, I think, creates that authenticity that you mentioned. In the last few questions, I want to be selfish before I let you go and get some advice from you on three areas of my business that I think every consultant could benefit from, right? And I think a lot of us struggle with these areas. Number one, outreach. Talk about customer acquisition and I mean, do you do much outreach? Are you cold calling? Do you have sequences running? Are you on LinkedIn dropping messages? And you don't need to take us through your whole acquisition
Hmm.
process, but just in general, are you doing a ton of outreach?
You know, over the years, if you look at where our clients came from, it's overwhelmingly from word of mouth or relationships. So there's a lot of, networking,
Yeah.
face-to-face experiences are important, meeting new people. I have now two podcasts which allow me to interview a lot of folks and meet new people, become wise in various topics. I have, though, obsessed over the last 10 years with creating a marketing system that would allow me to do less of that.
Right. I mean, that's the
So,
goal at the end of the day.
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. And so what has happened is, yes, we have been very successful with email outreach to CEOs, and believe it or not. But what that requires, though, is a real, very clear and very specific understanding of the problem you're trying to solve, conveying that in an effective way. It's not about volume; it's about quality of the message, and doing that in a way that's not going to disrupt your brand or put you in a position of being this hacker or something less than who you are. But yeah, very important. But the best thing you can do is just wow your clients, impress your clients, and then leverage time as you do that to really build equity in your brand and allow that to sustain the business over time.
Thank you. Yeah, it's some of those things that I go back and forth with. 99% of my businesses come by way of recommendations and referrals. Um, but it's the same dialogue I think we have with a lot of our clients. The inbound gets you so far. And if you want to accelerate, then a lot of times going outbound is the way to go. So I've been doing a little bit more of that myself, but I've been toying with really turning it up. I don't have sequences running. I don't think it fits my business. To your point, I want to be very tailored to my approach. So I don't try to use any sort of templates or anything. It's all kind of, small number of accounts and contexts that I pursue at any given time, take them through a process. If I hear back, then we continue. If not, I move on to the next ones and then recycle later on. But I just
Mhm.
want to kind of get your take on the outreach side of things. Number two of three, content. You mentioned you have two podcasts now that you're running. Where do you apply your focus in terms of time? You mentioned we've talked about time a lot. So where do you get the most impact from your time investment regarding content?
Yeah, the digital side has been tough. So my experience, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I've got about
Yeah.
16,000 connections, and they're curated connections. They're people that at one point or another I've met or engaged or gotten to know or worked with. Um, the digital world for me is not a world I can use necessarily to on a mass level source business. In my world, the digital world is really there as a way to validate or confirm somebody referring me to someone else, or we meet each other, they go on and they learn more about me, they come across some stuff like you did, the research that you do. So it's really meant to help build credibility for who I am, and paint a picture of who I am for someone, before they get a hold of me, or once they meet me and they share my name with other people on their team. It gives the team members a chance now to kind of get to know me. So
It goes back to the buyer's journey of them wanting to do their due diligence and
yeah,
be as repless as possible. So it probably doesn't play much different with us in terms of people evaluating individual consultants before they engage with them. They're trying to do their due diligence. So it's good that you have a website and, an online presence that can convey your message. And I have to say, you're very congruent, because the messages you convey in your podcast interviews and in your discussions, not just with me, but with others. And then when I see on your website and I see your content, you've mastered that, right? And some of us, me included, all step off the beaten path and post about something personal, or maybe it's not personal, but I'll talk about working out. Like
right.
I'll be all over the map sometimes with my content, and I have to give it to you, like your messages, the phraseology, everything down to it. You have it very tuned. And I can tell, that's why I wanted to ask about your content approach, and on the content and the digital image that you have there online. Your website, like I was saying to you in our prep, is one of the best websites I've seen for any individual consultants. So you didn't do that yourself? I imagine you hired someone to do that, because
I had
a
an
lot of us
amazing
are thinking
copywriter.
about, should I be tinkering with my website? And right. So
You gotta, we invested in a outstanding copywriter who we still work with, and the branding agency that did the design work is doing my next site. Works with most of my clients. So we've got
there you
some
go.
great. We're supported by some great talent. There's no question.
Yeah, check out their website, florissgroup.com, double S. All right, last question, and I'll let you go. This is actually, I have a bonus question, but this one's for
Love
me,
it. Let's
the
go.
pricing book. Pricing. So
Yeah.
I think that's something we all struggle with. And the jump off point is usually hourly, right? But there's all these different models out there, value based and so on and so forth. So what's your advice to someone who's thinking through their pricing strategy as a consultant? How should we be pricing this stuff?
Yeah. Well, there's no one answer, right? But if you are a value-based provider, if you can deliver a level of measurable value, whether it's measured economically, whether it's measured strategically or personally, right? Um, you've gotta establish or gain agreement to that value before you get to price, no matter how you set your price up. But if somebody's buying value from you, so for example, if I'm working with an organization and the CEO wants to double the size of the business in 3 years, and the value of the business today is 5 million, but by doubling the business, they can get to a $20 million valuation. They've got a $15 million problem or challenge. Once we establish that, it really doesn't matter what my price is, as long as it's reasonable, as long as they can afford it compared to that value proposition. So now, of course, if you don't establish value and somebody receives your price, they're immediately going to compare it
Right.
to your competition or to other competitive options that they have, including doing nothing. And that's when hourly is really tough, because they're going to compare you to what they pay their CPA or their attorney
Right.
or whoever. And then if you're a fixed fee person, they're going to compare it to, wow, that's as much as my car, that's as much as I pay my top rep, a year. So you've really got to build value first, and then whether it's hourly or fixed fee, you got to make sure that it suits the business you're in and it's relevant to the customer. I've had attorneys that I worked with who charge $1,000 an hour, but they would never pay that for an attorney to help them. So they don't even think they're worth it. So you've really got to make sure you understand the mindset, the psychology of the person you're talking to when or the industry you're working within, when you start thinking about that pricing model.
Is it math? Is it, hey, X plus Y equals Z, or like getting to that value figure, right?
Yeah.
What it's worth to them. Is
Yeah.
it just them telling you this is how big of a problem, how expensive a problem
Yeah.
this is? I know we could probably do a whole episode on this, but
Let's do that
is it a
next.
combination of both?
Well, the WINS methodology, when you talked about WINS, our WINS methodology, the W and the I stands for wants and impacts. So what vision do I have? What passion do I want to express? What desires do I have? What frustrations are annoying me at this moment? This is going to define what I want. That's the first thing you have to discuss. Then you have to ask the impact of success, failure, or doing nothing, right? So that initial conversation has to be really deep, and your objective is to truly understand and help the client understand what's important to them, right? And if you've done it a couple of times, you'll know, right? Just like your ICP or your always buyer persona, you'll know what answers you're looking for, because those answers will dictate whether or not this person's the right client for you. If they're qualified, because the W plus I equals V, wants plus impacts equals value. If you can establish value that meets the criteria for a successful customer, now you know you're set. Now you know you're ready to go. And now you know you've got a value proposition that can make your pricing model make sense and deliver you the margin you need to run a successful business long term.
Beautiful.
Did that
Last
help?
question. Yes. When are you writing a book? When is the book coming out?
Yeah. I
You
posted
got to
on
write a
LinkedIn.
book, man. There's just it's too much goodness there.
I appreciate it. No, I appreciate it. I posted on LinkedIn I'm writing a book, and now I've got
Ah,
3 book projects I'm working on at the same time. So yeah, I appreciate it. The interesting thing about what we do is it applies in so many areas, from a leadership perspective as well as from a pure sales perspective. So we're exploring both of those models today, and I'm also working on a book and training program for folks who have never sold before, actually. So we're helping creatives and folks who are pure product or pure service
technical
people,
founders.
technical founders who have never done it before, help them recognize that they already have all the capability they need to be a world-class salesperson. All they have to change is the mindset, right, about what's required or what the definition of success is. And we're helping them think about that as well.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Sales Consultant Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, it would go a long way if you were to write a short review on the listening app of your choice.